Hey guys, you are not going crazy. You are just leaving the keys to your mind in the pocket of a manipulator. Right now, you might be exhausted from walking on eggshells, constantly replaying conversations in your head, and questioning your own memory of events just because someone else insists their twisted version is the absolute truth. You stay up late, draining your energy, trying to figure out the exact right combination of words that will finally make them understand your perspective, acknowledge their lies, and validate your reality. But no matter how hard you try, the facts always get scrambled. The blame is always shifted back onto your shoulders, and you are left feeling completely drained and doubting your own sanity. You think the problem is that you are not explaining yourself clearly enough, but the real problem is that you are living your life based on a fundamental delusion. Over 2,000 years ago, a man who survived the brutal reality of slavery understood exactly why you are suffering. His name was Epictetus, and he discovered that true freedom has nothing to do with your external circumstances and everything to do with your mind. He taught that the single most important practice in life is differentiating between what we can change and what we cannot. He declared that some things are in our control and others not. In our power are our own opinions, pursuits, desires, and actions, while things not in our control include our reputation, other people's behavior, and whatever is not our own doing. When you argue with a gaslighter, begging them to see reason or admit their fault, you are desperately trying to control something that is entirely outside of your power. You are tying your emotional stability to the unpredictable and often malicious whims of another human being. The Stoics would tell you that if a person gave away your physical body to a random passerby, you would be furious. Yet you willingly hand over your mind to anyone who comes along, allowing them to leave you disturbed and troubled. The gaslighter's power does not come from their clever lies. It comes entirely from your willingness to believe that you need their validation to be okay. Stoicism teaches us that it is not things that upset people, but rather their judgments about those things. When the manipulator hurls an insult or twists a story, it is not the person giving the abuse that affronts you, but your own view that takes these things as insulting. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your own mind is complicit in the provocation. You are suffering because you are demanding that the external world, in this case, the manipulator, behave according to your wishes. But their behavior is an external indifferent, completely outside the walls of your inner citadel. You cannot magically make them honest, but you have absolute control over your own assent, which is the ability to look at their harsh or manipulative words and tell yourself that it is merely an impression and not at all what it seems to be. You do not have to give your psychological consent to their distorted reality. Once you internalize this dichotomy of control, you will realize that trying to change a gaslighter is as foolish as trying to control the weather. You cannot stop the storm of their deception, but you can build a mental shelter so strong that the rain never touches you. By pulling your focus entirely away from what they do and placing it strictly on how you choose to judge the situation, you strip them of all their power and take your mind back. To understand how to take your mind back, you first have to understand the specific illusion the gaslighter has trapped you inside. The trap is not just the lie they are telling you. The trap is your desperate, burning need to make them admit that they are lying. Think about the last time you confronted this person. You probably brought irrefutable evidence to the table. Perhaps a written message, a clear timeline of events, or a distinct memory of a conversation from just yesterday. You presented this evidence logically, fully expecting them to finally look at the facts, break down, and admit that you are right and they are wrong. But instead of apologizing or taking accountability, they immediately deflected. They looked you right in the eye and told you that you are remembering it all wrong, that you are being way too sensitive, or that you are deliberately twisting their innocent words to make them look bad. Suddenly, within the span of a few minutes, you found yourself frantically defending your own sanity instead of holding them accountable for their actions. This is the core of the gaslighter's illusion. They use profound confusion as a primary weapon, and they win the battle the exact moment you step into their arena to debate the basic, undeniable facts of reality. You leave these arguments feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely emptied out, while they often walk away looking perfectly calm and entirely unaffected. Why does this dynamic continually repeat itself? The Stoic philosopher Epictetus provides a brilliant psychological insight that cuts right through this manipulation. He taught that when any person does ill by you or speaks ill of you, you must remember that they act or speak from a deeply held supposition that it is right for them to do so. It is completely impossible that they should follow what appears right to you, but only what appears right to themselves. Therefore, if they judge the world from a wrong or distorted appearance, they are the person who is ultimately hurt, since they are the person who is deceived. When you argue with a manipulator, you are operating under the false assumption that they value the objective truth just as much as you do. You must realize that they do not value the truth at all. They only value control. Their twisted version of reality is a desperate defense mechanism, a fictional script they have written where they are never the villain and you are always the problem. By trying to force them to see your reality, you are demanding that they give up their control and face their own flaws, which is the one thing their fragile ego will never voluntarily allow them to do. You are essentially begging a thirsty person to pour out their only cup of water. It is never going to happen. The powerful illusion that keeps you trapped in this toxic cycle is the mistaken belief that you absolutely need their validation to confirm that your reality is real. You keep going back to them, presenting your case over and over again like a lawyer in a courtroom, hoping for a fair verdict. But you must understand that in this specific courtroom, the gaslighter is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. You can never win because the game is entirely rigged against you from the very beginning. Stoicism teaches us that we suffer immensely because we confuse what is up to us with what is up to others. Their ability to understand your feelings, their capacity for genuine empathy, and their willingness to offer a sincere apology are factors that are entirely outside of your control. When you attach your personal peace of mind to their eventual confession, you are willingly chaining yourself to a ghost. You are letting someone else dictate your emotional weather based on their own sickness. The exact moment you realize that their denial of reality does not actually change reality, the entire illusion shatters. You do not need their agreement to know what you experienced. You do not need their apology to begin healing your wounds. Their distorted worldview is their own heavy burden to carry, not yours to fix or endure. If they choose to live their life in a house built entirely on lies, you do not have to move in with them. You can simply walk away, confident in your own clear perceptions, fully knowing that the only approval you need to move forward and be happy is your own. Now that you see the illusion for what it is, how do you actually protect yourself when you are standing right in front of them? Listening to them rewrite history. You need a shield, and the Stoic philosophers forged the ultimate psychological defense mechanism over 2,000 years ago. It is called the Dichotomy of Control, and it is the single most important concept you must internalize to survive and escape a manipulator. Epictetus taught that we must divide the entire world into two very distinct categories: things that are completely up to us and things that are not up to us. In our power are our own opinions, our choices, our desires, our aversions, and everything that is our own doing. Things that are not in our power include our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, and most importantly for your situation, the words, behaviors, and beliefs of every other human being on this planet. When you are caught in the suffocating web of gaslighting, this critical line between what is yours and what is theirs becomes completely blurred. The gaslighter deliberately erases this boundary, making you feel like you are responsible for their erratic emotions, their deliberate mistakes, and their completely distorted version of the truth. But the Stoics demand that you draw that line in the sand with absolute clarity. Their twisted words, their sudden bursts of anger, their stubborn refusal to acknowledge undeniable facts, and their relentless attempts to make you feel small are all external events. They are completely outside of your control. You could present them with 100 pages of irrefutable proof, a recording of their exact words, or a calendar detailing every event, and they could still choose to look you dead in the eye and lie without a single ounce of shame. You cannot control their vocal cords, you cannot control their perception of reality, and you cannot force their conscience to suddenly awaken. However, what you do control with absolute, unshakable authority is your own judgment about what they are saying. The Stoics call this the discipline of assent. When a gaslighter tells you that you are remembering things entirely wrong, or that you are overreacting, or that you are losing your mind, that statement is just an external impression. It is merely a string of sounds vibrating in the air. It only has the power to hurt you, to confuse you, or to make you deeply doubt yourself if you give it your active psychological consent. You have the ultimate veto power in your own mind. You can look at their lie, examine it with cold and calculated logic, and simply refuse to stamp it with your approval. You can say to yourself, that is just their distorted impression of the world, and it is not the objective reality. The gaslighter desperately wants you to believe that their words define you, but their words only define their own broken and toxic character. By embracing the dichotomy of control, you begin to build what the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel. This is an impenetrable fortress within your own mind. You learn to stand perfectly still as the furious storm of their manipulation rages all around you, recognizing that while the storm might roar loudly outside, you do not have to let a single drop of rain breach your walls. You finally stop wasting your precious, limited energy trying to change a mind that is padlocked shut from the inside. Instead, you pour all of your focus into the one place where you have supreme and total power, which is your own faculty of judgment. You protect your own clear perceptions. You fiercely guard your own inner peace. And you realize that while you absolutely cannot silence the lies they choose to speak, you possess the undeniable, magnificent power to completely refuse to believe them. But here is the most brutal truth about this entire dynamic. A reality so counterintuitive that it might initially make you angry to hear. The very act of trying to prove that you are right is exactly what is keeping you trapped in the cycle of abuse. You think that by gathering your text messages, laying out the timeline, and presenting a flawless, logical argument, you are finally taking your power back and standing up for yourself. You deeply believe that if you just formulate the exact perfect sentence, the gaslighter will experience a sudden psychological awakening, drop their defenses, apologize, and validate your experience. But from a Stoic perspective, this frantic pursuit of their confession is the ultimate surrender of your own freedom. The philosopher Epictetus delivered a profound warning that perfectly diagnoses this trap. He stated that a person's master is anyone who is able to confer or remove whatever that person seeks or shuns. Whoever then would be free. Let him wish nothing. Let him decline nothing, which depends on others. Else he must necessarily be a slave. When you desperately seek the manipulator's acknowledgement of the objective truth, you are actively seeking something that is entirely within their power to withhold from you. By tying your emotional stability and your sense of reality to their willingness to confess, you are literally crowning them as your master. You are handing them a leash and willingly placing it around your own neck. You must understand that the gaslighter does not care about your flawless evidence, because the argument was never actually about the facts. The argument is always about power and control. When they twist your words, deny things they said just yesterday, or accuse you of being overly sensitive, they are throwing bait into the water, waiting to see if you will bite. And every single time you launch into a passionate, tearful defense of your memory. Every time you cry out in frustration, begging them to just be reasonable, you swallow the bait whole. You provide them with the exact emotional reaction they crave to feel superior. They watch you spin out of control, exhausted, breathless, and frantic, while they remain coldly detached and comfortably in charge. Your desperation to make them see the truth is the very oxygen that keeps the fire of their manipulation burning. You are treating their twisted opinion as if it were a matter of life and death. But their opinion is just an external indifferent. It has no actual bearing on your moral character, your worth, or your objective reality. The Stoics recognize that our greatest vulnerabilities are not our physical weaknesses, but our misplaced desires. You desire a harmonious resolution that requires the willing cooperation of someone who is fundamentally committed to misunderstanding you and breaking you down. This is why the harder you fight to prove your reality, the more you lose your grip on it. You are fighting a grueling war on their territory, using their rigged rules, and the only way to truly win this game is to absolutely refuse to play it. You have to realize that you do not need a confession from a liar to know that a lie was told. You do not need their signature on a piece of paper to validate that what you experienced was real. The truth does not require the gaslighter's endorsement to remain the absolute truth. Once you fully internalize this Stoic wisdom, the entire dynamic permanently flips. You stop bringing your precious evidence to a kangaroo court. You stop trying to convince a brick wall to suddenly feel empathy. You begin to see their relentless denials not as a terrifying threat to your sanity, but as a pathetic, predictable reflection of their own broken character. You instantly strip away their title as your master simply by ceasing to desire their validation. And in that profound moment of letting go, you take all of your power back. So, how do you actually execute this refusal to play their game when they are standing right in front of you, looking you in the eye, and telling a blatant, undeniable lie? How do you maintain your firm grip on reality when they are actively trying to pull the rug out from under you and make you doubt your own memory? You must deploy a highly specific, historically proven technique that the ancient Stoics mastered to protect their own peace of mind. We can call this the stone response. The philosopher Epictetus once posed a brilliant, almost humorous challenge to his students to illustrate this exact concept of emotional detachment. He told them to go stand next to a large rock and hurl vicious insults at it. He asked them to yell at the rock, blame the rock for all of their personal problems, and try their hardest to make the rock feel bad about itself. What is the actual effect produced by doing this? Absolutely nothing. If you stand in a public park screaming at a stone, the stone remains perfectly still, entirely unaffected, and you are the person who ends up looking completely ridiculous and foolish. Epictetus then delivered the profound punchline to this exercise, asking what advantage the slanderer has if the person they are attacking simply chooses to listen like a stone. This is exactly how you must approach the gaslighter's twisted reality. You have to understand that when a manipulator twists the facts or denies something they clearly did, they are not actually trying to have a rational, productive conversation with you. They are simply poking you with a sharp stick to see if you will jump. They are throwing emotional bait into the water to see if you will desperately bite. They want you to cry. They want you to raise your voice. And they want you to frantically start explaining yourself because your intense emotional distress is the absolute clearest proof to them that they are the ones who are in control. Your frantic reaction is the premium fuel that keeps their toxic manipulation machine running. But what happens if they throw that bait and you just stare at them? What happens if they tell a massive, unbelievable lie about what happened yesterday? And instead of pulling out your calendar and your text messages to prove them wrong, you simply look at them like a gray, immovable stone. The entire dynamic immediately collapses. You see, a manipulation attempt is a two-part process. First, they have to throw the deceptive words at you, which is entirely their choice. But second, you have to actively catch those words, interpret them as a threat to your reality, and react to them emotionally. If you refuse to catch the words, the insult falls flat on the floor. When you react with absolute emotional neutrality, you completely nullify the very reason for their manipulation. The gaslighter is left standing there, essentially yelling at a rock, and their perceived power dissolves into thin air. There is no logical reason to react emotionally to a deception that you cannot magically force them to stop doing. Their choice to lie is completely out of your hands, but your reaction is 100% under your own control. In many of these highly toxic encounters, the absolute best and most powerful reaction is no reaction at all. You do not have to agree with their twisted version of the story, but you also do not have to waste a single breath fighting it. By adopting the stone response, you create an impenetrable boundary around your mind, letting their lies echo in the empty space between you, completely unacknowledged and entirely powerless. Now that you have mastered the stone response on the outside, we must address the fierce, exhausting battle that is still raging on the inside of your head. You might stand there silently without reacting, but inside, your thoughts are frantically racing. You are wondering if maybe they are right, if maybe you really are misremembering the situation, or if you truly are the problem in the relationship. This creeping internal doubt is exactly the psychological vulnerability that the gaslighter is banking on, and to defeat it permanently, you must master the second profound technique, which the ancient Stoics called the discipline of assent. In Stoic psychology, your mind operates like a highly secure, impenetrable fortress, and every single thing that happens in the outside world must first approach the gates of that fortress in the form of an impression. An impression is simply a proposal of reality. It is a piece of information, a thought, or an event knocking on your door, asking for permission to enter your inner world. When the gaslighter looks at you and confidently declares that a conversation never happened, or insists that you are losing your grip on reality, they are not speaking the objective truth. They are merely presenting an impression to the gates of your mind. Here is where your ultimate, undeniable superpower lies. For that impression to actually affect you, for it to successfully make you doubt your sanity or feel a crushing sense of guilt, you have to actively give it your assent. You have to psychologically stamp it with your approval, willingly open the gates, and agree that their twisted version of reality is true. But the Stoics realized that you possess an absolute veto power over every single impression that approaches your mind. The philosopher Epictetus instructed his students to look directly at any distressing thought or manipulative statement and firmly say, "You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be." Think of the gaslighter's lie as a forged contract. They confidently slide this fraudulent document across the table, demanding that you sign it with your emotions, your guilt, and your self-doubt. They absolutely need your signature to make their lie real in your world. But you do not have to pick up the pen. You can simply look at the contract, recognize it as a pathetic forgery, and completely refuse to give it your psychological assent. When you withhold your assent, You are practicing what the Stoics called objective representation. You are stripping away all the emotional adjectives and toxic value judgments that the manipulator is desperately trying to force onto the situation. If they call you crazy, the objective reality is not that you are losing your mind, but simply that this specific person is currently vibrating their vocal cords to produce the word crazy in order to avoid taking responsibility for their own actions. The Stoic philosopher Seneca reminded us that we must separate the objective facts from the stories we tell ourselves about those facts. You see the machinery of their deception laid bare. The gaslighter relies entirely on you adding a story of deep self-doubt to their initial lie. They need you to tell yourself that if this person is saying these harsh things, it must somehow be your fault. But when you lock down your assent, you cut off that destructive internal narrative before it can even begin. You stop doing the gaslighter's psychological work for them. You realize that you cannot control the absurd, painful lies they choose to verbalize, but you have absolute, tyrannical control over whether or not you grant those lies the permission to become your truth. This practice builds an unbreachable wall around your perception, allowing you to stand firmly grounded in your own undeniable reality while their desperate attempts to confuse you simply shatter against the locked gates of your mind. Even when you learn to stand like a stone on the outside and lock the gates of your mind against their false impressions on the inside, there is still one final psychological trap you have to dismantle. It is the lingering, agonizing desire for closure. Deep down, a part of you still wants to win the argument. You still harbor this secret, burning fantasy that one day, if you just find the perfect analogy, present the ultimate piece of evidence, or explain your pain in just the right tone of voice, the manipulator will experience a sudden awakening. You hope they will break down, apologize, and finally validate the reality you have been desperately fighting for. But holding on to this specific hope is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. To completely liberate yourself from their twisted reality, you have to master the third and perhaps most profound Stoic technique, which modern philosophers call internalizing your goals. The ancient Stoics understood that setting external goals is a guaranteed recipe for anxiety and misery. To illustrate this, think of the brilliant analogy of a tennis match. If a tennis player sets their ultimate goal as winning the championship match, they are setting themselves up for potential devastation. Because winning does not belong entirely to them. The wind might blow unexpectedly, the referee might make a terrible call, or the opponent might simply play the game of their life. Winning is an external indifferent. Therefore, the wise Stoic player shifts the goal. Their goal is no longer to win the match, but rather to play the match to the absolute best of their ability. They focus entirely on their preparation, their focus, and their own swing. Because this new goal is entirely internal and within their complete control, no opponent, no bad referee, and no bad weather can ever steal their victory. You must apply this exact same psychological shift to your interactions with the gaslighter. Right now, your goal is external. Your goal is to make them see the truth, to force them to take accountability, or to get them to change their toxic behavior. because those outcomes depend entirely on a person who is fundamentally committed to deception and control. You will constantly fail, and you will constantly suffer. You have to completely internalize your goal. You must entirely redefine what a successful interaction with this person looks like. A successful interaction is no longer one where they finally confess to their lies. A successful interaction is now one where you remain perfectly calm, where you refuse to compromise your own integrity, and where you protect your inner peace at all costs. You go into the conversation saying to yourself, "My only objective today is to be a person of virtue, to observe the objective facts, and to not let their toxic behavior pull me out of my own character." When you make this monumental shift, the manipulator instantly loses all of their leverage over you. They can yell, they can project their insecurities, they can completely rewrite history, and they can play the ultimate victim. But none of that matters to you anymore, because your success no longer depends on their reaction. If they throw a massive tantrum while you remain centered, breathing slowly and observing them objectively, you have won your internal match. You have played to the best of your ability. By completely detaching your sense of achievement and your emotional well-being from their unpredictable behavior, you stop being a victim pleading for a fair trial in a rigged courtroom. You become a self-sufficient fortress. You finally realize that you never actually needed them to be a good person in order for you to be okay. You just need to be a good person, standing firmly in the light of your own truth, completely untethered from the dark, chaotic storm of their manipulation. When you finally stop tying your success to their confession and start internalizing your goals, you will arrive at the ultimate realization of Stoic philosophy. This is the philosophical climax of your entire struggle, the moment where you truly become untouchable. The ancient Stoics believed that inside every single human being, there is a core of pure, unadulterated freedom that absolutely no one can ever breach. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius referred to this profound, quiet space as the inner citadel. He realized that the human mind, when freed from irrational passions and desperate desires for external validation, is a fortress so incredibly strong and impenetrable that no external force can ever conquer it. The manipulator in your life has spent months, maybe even years, trying to convince you that they hold the ultimate keys to this fortress. They desperately want you to believe that because they can confuse you, because they can relentlessly twist your memories, and because they can make your daily life incredibly stressful. They somehow own your mind and dictate your reality. But you have to understand that this is the grandest, most pathetic lie of all. The philosopher Epictetus, a man who actually lived as a slave and endured unimaginable physical abuse and restriction, understood the true nature of freedom far better than anyone who has only known comfort. He famously declared that while an oppressor might be able to bind his leg in heavy iron chains, not even the supreme god Zeus himself had the power to break his fundamental freedom of choice. You absolutely must apply this exact same fierce, uncompromising logic to your own psychological survival right now. The gaslighter might be able to trap you in an exhausting 2-hour argument in your living room. They might be able to completely ruin your Sunday afternoon with a sudden outburst of manufactured rage. And they might even be able to temporarily turn other people against you by spreading highly calculated, false narratives. Those are external conditions, and sometimes, for a short while, we just have to endure them. But you must hear this clearly. They absolutely cannot force you to surrender your internal will. They cannot physically reach inside your brain and rewire your fundamental understanding of what is right and what is wrong. They cannot make you agree with their deeply distorted version of reality unless you willingly and consciously hand over your psychological consent. Your power of reasoned choice, what the Stoics called your supreme ruling faculty, remains entirely yours, completely untouched and pristine, hovering far above the chaotic, muddy mess of their toxic behavior. When you truly grasp the absolute magnitude of this inherent power, the heavy, suffocating fear that has been weighing you down simply begins to melt away. You finally stop looking at the gaslighter as some all-powerful mastermind who controls your emotional destiny, and you start seeing them for what they actually are in the cold light of day. They are just a deeply flawed, fundamentally unhappy human being who is desperately trying to control the people around them because they have absolutely zero control over their own turbulent mind. Their constant lying, their aggressive shifting of blame, and their relentless manipulation are not signs of power or strength. They are the ultimate, undeniable proof of their profound inner weakness and fragility. They are absolutely terrified of the objective truth, while you are actively learning to stand firmly and calmly rooted in it. By consciously building and fortifying your own inner citadel, you are reclaiming your sovereign, natural right to define your own reality. You finally recognize that even if they scream their ridiculous lies at the top of their lungs, the sheer volume of their voice does not magically alter the objective facts of the universe. The truth does not ever need their reluctant endorsement to continue existing. You can now look at them with a calm, steady, unwavering gaze, fully aware that while they might be able to dictate the immediate, uncomfortable circumstances of the room you are standing in, they have absolutely zero jurisdiction over your soul. You are no longer a helpless victim waiting in the dark to be rescued or validated by the very person who hurt you. You are the undisputed, sovereign ruler of your own mind, standing tall and completely secure in the unshakable knowledge that your free will is an absolute, undeniable force of nature that no manipulator on this earth can ever break, bend, or steal. The next time you find yourself standing face to face with this manipulator, and they casually drop a massive, distorted lie into the conversation, you are going to experience a profound psychological shift. In the past, this was the exact moment your heart would start racing. Your chest would tighten, and you would desperately scramble to find the perfect words to defend yourself and prove them wrong. But now, armed with the unbreakable shield of Stoic philosophy, you will feel something entirely different. You will feel a profound, quiet stillness. You will look at them, and instead of seeing a terrifying authority figure who holds the power to dictate your sanity, you will see a deeply lost, fragile human being who is trapped in a prison of their own making. You will realize that for months, or perhaps even years, you have been carrying a massive, crushing weight on your shoulders. That weight was their distorted reality. their relentless projections, and their desperate insecurities. You thought it was your absolute responsibility to carry that weight, to unpack it, and to somehow make sense of all the nonsense. But the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius provided the ultimate key to dropping this burden when he wrote that you can choose not to be harmed, and you will not feel harmed. And if you do not feel harmed, then you have not been harmed. The gaslighter's twisted words only have weight if you actively choose to pick them up and carry them. In this new moment of absolute clarity, you are simply going to take that heavy burden off your shoulders, set it gently on the floor right at their feet, and leave it there. It is their luggage, and they can carry it themselves. You do not have to fight them. You do not have to passionately argue with them. And you certainly do not have to convince them that you are right. You just have to stop participating in their illusion. The philosopher Epictetus used a brilliant, simple metaphor to describe how we should handle toxic, unlivable situations. He said that if a room is filled with a little bit of smoke, we might choose to stay and endure it. But if the smoke becomes too thick and suffocating, we must always remember that the door is wide open and we can simply walk out. The gaslighter's entire psychological world is a house actively burning to the ground, filled with the dark, suffocating smoke of deception, manipulation, and control. You have been standing inside their burning house, choking on their toxic smoke, desperately trying to fan the air and put out a fire that they keep intentionally pouring gasoline on. But you finally realize that the door has been wide open this entire time. You do not have to stay and fix their broken house. You can simply turn around and walk outside into the crisp, clean, undeniable air of objective reality. You step out into the light of the truth, leaving them to play their exhausting, chaotic games all by themselves in the dark. You take a deep, steady breath, feeling the absolute freedom of knowing that your mind belongs entirely to you again. You look up at the clear sky, fully recognizing that the truth of the universe does not change just because a manipulator stubbornly refuses to see it. You retreat safely into your impenetrable inner citadel, secure in the knowledge that no matter what lies they choose to whisper or shout, your peace, your sanity, and your sovereign free will are completely untouched, forever out of their reach. And finally, beautifully, your own. If you found the strength to rebuild your inner citadel today, make sure to subscribe to this channel so we can continue this journey of philosophical awakening together. Leave a comment below with the word freedom if you are ready to take your mind back from those who try to manipulate your reality. Do not forget to hit the like button so this message can reach others who might be trapped in the dark smoke of a gaslighter's illusion, desperately looking for the open door. Your mind is your own, so choose to protect it. And I will see you in the next video.